The courthouse in downtown Springfield stood like a relic of another era. Its tall stone columns reached skyward, stern and immovable, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement where a crowd had gathered. Reporters lingered at the steps, clutching notepads and microphones, their cameras poised for any sign of trauma. Inside, the air was thick with tension, the kind of heaviness that clings to every breath when truth and lies are about to collide. Courtroom 3B was already packed when the bailiff called for order. Families pressed together on the wooden benches, whispers rising and falling like waves. Lawyers shifted in their seats, adjusting stacks of files that suddenly seemed too heavy to carry. The case had gripped the town for weeks, a story so shocking that even those who normally ignored the news found themselves glued to every update. Today promised answers, or at least that was the hope. At the defense table sat a man whose name had become synonymous with fear. His once respectable appearance was now dulled by weeks of stress and sleepless nights. His jaw tightened as he scanned the room, eyes darting from jurors to the prosecutor's table. He avoided looking at the gallery, where families of victims sat with clenched fists and tear-streaked faces. If there was guilt behind his stare, he was doing his best to bury it. But guilt has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep it's pushed. Across the room, seated beside his handler, was the most unlikely figure of authority. A German shepherd with eyes that seemed to see everything. His fur was sleek, his body strong yet calm. Every movement was deliberate, every breath steady. He was no ordinary dog. He was a decorated police canine, trained for search, rescue, and protection. To the public, he was a hero. To the accused man, he was a reminder of the night everything unraveled. The judge entered, his black robe swaying as he climbed onto the bench. His gavel struck once, echoing like thunder through the chamber. Silence followed, broken only by the faint creak of wooden benches as people shifted uncomfortably. The trial had begun. Witnesses were scheduled to testify, and legal arguments would unfold. Yet before the proceedings could properly take shape, something unexpected happened. The courtroom doors creaked open, pulling every eye toward the back. A young woman entered hesitantly, holding the tiny hand of a child. Gasps rippled through the gallery. She looked out of place, fragile against the gravity of the moment. Her daughter couldn't have been more than 3 years old, with soft curls framing her round face and eyes far too wide for the setting she had just walked into. The little girl clutched a small stuffed rabbit, its ears worn from love and time. She wasn't meant for places like this. Children belonged in parks, playgrounds, or tucked safely in bed, not in a courtroom filled with anger, fear, and the weight of justice. The judge frowned, glancing at the bailiff as if to question the intrusion. But the woman whispered hurriedly to an officer, who nodded and escorted her toward a side bench. She had been given permission, though the reasoning wasn't immediately clear. Perhaps she was connected to a witness. Perhaps she sought closure. No one knew for certain. Still, the sight of a child in such a place unsettled the room. The girl, however, didn't appear unsettled. She sat beside her mother, swinging her legs absent-mindedly as though unaware of the storm around her. Then, slowly, her gaze drifted forward. It didn't settle on the judge, the lawyers, or the man at the defense table. Instead, it locked on the police canine sitting attentively by his handler's side. Her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. At first, no one noticed. The attorney shuffled papers, the judge began reading instructions, and the jury adjusted in their seats. But the dog noticed. His ears twitched, his head tilting slightly as his amber eyes fixed on the child. The handler tugged gently at the leash, thinking the dog was distracted, but the shepherd remained focused, steady yet alert. The girl's mother glanced down, surprised to see her daughter so captivated. She whispered for her to sit still, but the child didn't respond. Her entire world in that moment was the dog. Meanwhile, the man on trial grew visibly restless. His hands fidgeted beneath the table, fingers tapping against his knees. For the first time since the hearing began, he dared to glance toward the child. The moment his eyes landed on her, he quickly looked away, his face blanching. No one else seemed to notice, but a bead of sweat trickled down his temple, betraying the calm mask he tried to maintain. The judge's voice carried over the courtroom, outlining the seriousness of the charges and the responsibility now placed upon the jurors. Every word felt heavy, each syllable binding the room tighter in tension. Yet beneath that official rhythm, an unspoken undercurrent was forming, an unseen connection between the little girl and the police dog that no one could yet explain. The gallery sat in silence, but it wasn't the comfortable kind. It was the kind that presses against the chest, makes the throat dry, and leaves everyone waiting for something they can't name. The presence of that child shifted everything. The bailiff called the first witness. The proceedings moved forward, but not a soul could shake the image of the girl's wide-eyed stare and the dog's unwavering attention. It was as though they were communicating silently across the room, bound by something no one else understood. The defendant rubbed his temples, his jaw tightening again. He knew what the others didn't. He knew that dog had been there the night his secrets came to light. And he knew, perhaps more than anyone else, that the innocent presence of a child could be far more dangerous than the sharpest lawyer. The trial was just beginning, but already the atmosphere had changed. People leaned forward slightly in their seats, unable to look away. They didn't yet know why the girl was there, or why the dog reacted as if he had known her forever. But deep down, a collective instinct stirred. Something extraordinary was about to unfold. And though the gavel would strike many more times before the day was done, it was the soft footsteps of a little girl entering that courtroom that set everything into motion, the kind of moment that rewrites the entire course of a case. Tension thickened, invisible yet undeniable. Every heart in that room, whether they admitted it or not, beat a little faster. No one would leave unchanged. Not after this. The trial pressed on, yet the presence of the child remained impossible to ignore. In a room where hardened criminals, seasoned attorneys, and weary officials gathered daily, the sight of a 3-year-old girl sitting quietly on a wooden bench seemed surreal. She didn't fidget like most children her age. She didn't whimper or ask for toys. Instead, she watched her big, unblinking eyes fixed with a seriousness far beyond her years. The judge, stern but human, found his gaze wandering back to her more than once. Though he had allowed her presence, he silently questioned whether it was appropriate. Courtrooms were places of confrontation, arguments, and at times, brutal revelations. They were not places for innocence. Yet there she sat, small legs swinging as though unaware of the gravity of the moment. Her mother, seated close beside her, kept whispering reminders. "Stay quiet, sweetie. Just hold Bunny. Don't move around too much." The little girl clutched her stuffed rabbit, but barely nodded. Her attention was elsewhere. What unsettled? The room wasn't just that she was present. It was the peculiar way she stared at the police dog. The German Shepherd, a model of discipline, usually sat motionless during trials. He was trained not to react to distractions. No sudden noises, no wandering eyes from the gallery, not even food wrappers crinkling. Yet today was different. From the moment the girl walked in, his posture shifted. His ears twitched, his tail flicked once against the polished floor. And when her eyes met his, the stillness of his frame seemed to mask a bubbling recognition. The handler, Officer Daniels, noticed immediately. He'd worked with this canine for 5 years, through raids. searches and standoffs. He knew his partner's every cue. Something about the little girl had stirred the dog. Daniels tightened the leash subtly, whispering, "Easy, Rex. Stay." But Rex's eyes never left the child. Across the courtroom, murmurs began to rise. It wasn't just the gallery who noticed jurors exchanged puzzled glances, some leaning closer as though they too felt the odd energy between the girl and the animal. Even the prosecutor glanced toward the back, his brow furrowing slightly, though he quickly returned his focus to his notes. Still, attention kept drifting. The defendant, once stoic, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. His jaw clenched, his fingers tapping nervously against the table. The moment the girl had entered, a shadow crossed his face. He hadn't looked at her since, but his sudden agitation betrayed him. His lawyer leaned in to whisper, but the man shook his head sharply, eyes darting toward the floor. Meanwhile, testimony unfolded at the witness stand. A neighbor described the night of the crime, recounting noises, shadows, and screams that haunted her still. Her voice cracked as she spoke, but the weight of her words seemed oddly muted against the silent drama growing between the little girl and the canine. The girl tilted her head slightly, as if studying the dog the way one studies an old photograph, something familiar but out of reach. She didn't speak. She didn't point. She just stared, her small hand occasionally stroking the worn ear of her stuffed rabbit. The dog stared back. It was Officer Daniels who finally broke the tension. During a brief pause, he tugged on Rex's leash and cleared his throat. "Your Honor," he whispered to the judge, leaning forward slightly. "My dog's a little distracted today. Permission to step outside for a moment if necessary?" The judge frowned. "Is he agitated?" "Not exactly," Daniels admitted, eyes flicking toward the child. "Just unusually focused." The judge followed his gaze, spotting the little girl, who was now leaning slightly forward on the bench, still studying Rex. A ripple of unease spread across the judge's stern features. He tapped his gavel softly, not for silence, but as if grounding himself. "Noted. Continue with restraint for now, Officer Daniels." Daniels nodded, but his unease didn't fade. Rex wasn't just reacting, he was recognizing. And recognition meant history. The mother finally noticed too. She glanced between her daughter and the dog, her expression tightening. She placed a protective arm around the child, whispering firmly, "Stop staring, honey. Just look down. Don't bother the dog." But the little girl shook her head gently, never tearing her gaze away. It was the kind of defiance only innocence could carry, not rebellious, not intentional, but pure instinct. In the gallery, whispers grew louder. "Why is she here?" someone muttered. "Look at the dog, he knows her." "She came." The sharp reply, but the unease had already spread like wildfire. The defendant finally dared another glance. For the briefest second, his eyes locked on the girl, and something in his expression faltered. His lips parted as though to say something, but he quickly looked away, sweat dotting his forehead. He hunched forward, whispering angrily to his lawyer, who waved him off, urging him to remain composed. But composure was slipping. The little girl shifted in her seat. For the first time since arriving, she let go of her mother's hand. The stuffed rabbit dropped quietly to the floor, its soft body crumpling by her shoes. The sound was barely audible, but Rex's ears snapped forward instantly. His tail gave another flick. His chest rose higher, the faintest whine escaping his throat before Daniels hushed him. Everyone who noticed felt it, the invisible thread tightening between the two. The prosecutor paused in his questioning, glancing again toward the back. The defense attorney rubbed his temple, visibly frustrated by the distraction. The judge sighed heavily, rubbing the bridge of his nose as though anticipating that this small presence might derail an entire morning of testimony. but no one dared. Remove her. The truth was, they couldn't. The girl's mother had spoken quietly to the bailiff when she entered. Though the details weren't shared openly, rumor was already swirling that she and her daughter might hold a connection to the case, something deeper than mere curiosity. The exact nature of it wasn't clear yet, but if the whispers proved true, the child's presence wasn't just allowed. It was necessary. The jurors sensed it. The gallery sensed it. Even Rex sensed it. And so the trial continued, but it continued differently. Every question asked, every objection raised, every gavel strike landed under the heavy shadow of a small child's gaze and a dog's unshakable attention. It was no longer just about testimony and evidence. Something else was simmering beneath the surface, waiting to erupt. The girl leaned forward once more, her lips parting as though she might speak. Her mother tensed, squeezing her shoulder quickly. The child closed her mouth again, but didn't look away. Her eyes softened, almost tender, as though she wanted to reassure the dog of something only the two of them knew. Rex gave another faint whine, and though the trial was far from over, and no revelation had yet been spoken aloud, one truth became undeniable to everyone in that courtroom. This little girl was not an ordinary spectator. Her presence carried weight, and whatever she knew or remembered was about to change everything. The trial pressed on like an old clock, ticking endlessly, each minute dragging longer than the last. Testimonies rose and fell. Lawyers' voices cracked against objections. The judge's gavel thudded against the bench, calling for order whenever. Tempers threatened to flare. Yet despite the procedural rhythm, no one could focus entirely on the case. Their attention kept drifting again and again toward the back row, where the little girl sat with her mother. She hadn't said a word. She hadn't moved much either. And yet her presence had already altered the course of the morning. The dog felt it first. Rex, the police canine, was not a creature of coincidence. His training demanded discipline. But discipline can't suppress instinct, and instinct told him this child mattered. His ears twitched each time she shifted, his body leaning slightly as if waiting for her command. Officer Daniels, his handler, tightened the leash discreetly, whispering reminders to keep still. But Daniels's own nerves were betraying him. In all their years together, he had never seen Rex so intent on one person, let alone a stranger. The jurors, too, noticed. A few tried to push the distraction aside, burying themselves in notepads, but curiosity tugged at them. Even the most focused among them couldn't deny the peculiar magnetism between girl and dog. It was more than coincidence. It was connection. And then it happened. The girl slid down from her bench, her shoes tapping softly against the wooden floor. Her mother gasped quietly, reaching for her arm. "Sweetheart, sit back down, please." But the little girl didn't listen. She took a few tentative steps forward, her small stuffed rabbit dragging behind her now, its fabric ear caught beneath her shoe. The courtroom fell unnaturally quiet. The prosecutor froze mid-question, his words caught in his throat. The witness on the stand blinked in confusion. Even the judge paused, his gavel hovering above the desk, as though uncertain whether to strike it down or wait. Every eye turned toward the tiny figure making her way to the front. Her steps were slow, hesitant, yet purposeful. She wasn't wandering like a restless child. She was moving with intent. The silence thickened. You could hear the faint rustle of papers as someone set down their pen. You could hear the nervous cough of a juror, quickly stifled. You could hear the soft squeak of the girl's shoes as she stopped in the center of the aisle. And then she lifted her hand. Her tiny finger extended outward, trembling just slightly. But it didn't point at the judge. It didn't point at the man on trial. It pointed directly at Rex. The room froze. It was as though time itself had. been pulled taut, stretched until it nearly snapped. For a heartbeat, 2, 3, no one moved. The tension was unbearable, like the air before a thunderclap. Officer Daniels felt his chest tighten. His grip on the leash faltered. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words caught in his throat. He had seen his dog react in countless situations, crowds, suspects, dangerous chases. But he had never seen this. Never seen recognition bloom between a battle-hardened canine and a child so young. The judge leaned forward, lips parted, eyes narrowing as if to better understand what was unfolding. Jurors exchanged wide-eyed glances, their pens hovering uselessly above their notebooks. And the defendant, he sat rigid, his eyes locked on the girl as though staring into a ghost. A twitch rippled across his jaw. His hands clenched the edge of the defense table so tightly his knuckles turned white. The girl's hand didn't waver. She stood there, small and fragile, pointing at the police dog with the conviction of someone much older. For the longest moment, no one breathed. The courtroom, usually alive with arguments, murmurs, and rustling, had become a vacuum of stillness. And then, without warning, the child spoke. Her voice was soft, almost fragile, but it carried across the silent chamber like a bell. "Good boy." 2 words. 2 simple words that shattered the silence and set everything into motion. Rex reacted instantly. His body jerked upright, ears forward, tail thudding against the floor in an uncontrollable rhythm. A whine escaped his throat, followed by an eager bark that echoed against the walls. He strained forward against the leash, desperate to reach the child, desperate to confirm what his heart already knew. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Some people leaned back, startled. Others leaned forward, eyes wide in disbelief. Officer Daniels stumbled to control Rex, pulling hard on the leash. But the dog was unstoppable. His whines grew louder, his tail wagged furiously, his entire frame trembling with joy. This wasn't the reaction of a service dog responding to a stranger. This was reunion, recognition. The little girl's smile bloomed, small but radiant. She didn't flinch at the barking. She didn't shrink back in fear. Instead, she stretched out her tiny hand, fingers open as if offering reassurance. "Good boy," she repeated, softer this time, almost like a secret meant only for him. The courtroom erupted, not with chaos, but with murmurs, gasps, the rustle of disbelief spreading through the air. The judge's gavel slammed down, but it did little to calm the storm. "What is the meaning of this?" the judge demanded, though his voice cracked with something less than authority, something closer to awe. The girl's mother rushed forward, scooping her daughter into her arms, whispering frantically, "Why did you do that?" "Why, sweetheart?" But the girl kept her gaze fixed on the dog, her small body twisting in her mother's grasp as though she couldn't bear to look away. And Rex refused to look away too, his whole being vibrated with the urgency of unspoken truth. The defendant's composure, already fragile, shattered. He shifted in his seat, muttering to his lawyer in a harsh whisper. His face flushed, crimson, sweat glistening across his brow. For the first time since the trial began, the mask of control slipped entirely. Everyone saw it. Everyone felt it. In that single moment, with one outstretched finger and 2 whispered words, the little girl had changed everything. The silence that followed wasn't ordinary silence. It wasn't the absence of sound. It was the presence of something greater. The kind of silence that holds its breath, waiting for truth to crash down. The trial, once predictable, was now a storm. And everyone in that courtroom knew nothing would ever be the same. For a heartbeat, the entire courtroom seemed suspended in time. The child's voice, so delicate yet so certain, echoed like a whisper carried by the wind. "Good boy." Just 2 words. 2 words so ordinary on their own, yet in that charged. Silence, they struck like a hammer against glass. The dog responded instantly. Rex barked, his body vibrating with recognition, his tail slamming against the wooden floor as though it couldn't contain his joy. His eyes, sharp and alert a moment ago, softened into something else, something achingly familiar. He wasn't looking at a stranger. He was greeting someone he knew. Officer Daniels, caught off guard, yanked back on the leash. "Rex, heel," he ordered, his voice low but urgent. But Rex's body strained forward, his muscles pulling against every ounce of control. His whines rose higher, turning into a sound that was both desperate and relieved, as though he had waited for this moment without even knowing it. Gasps spread across the gallery. A woman near the back pressed a hand to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes. Jurors leaned forward in their seats, their pens forgotten. Even the court reporter, tasked with recording every word, froze mid-stroke, her eyes wide as she watched the scene unfold. The judge's gavel slammed down, the sharp crack jolting the room. "Order! Order in the court!" His voice boomed, but beneath the authority there was a quiver of disbelief. He had presided over dozens of trials in his career, seen tempers flare and witnesses crumble, but never had he seen a child and a police dog stop a proceeding with nothing but recognition. The little girl, unshaken by the commotion, repeated herself. This time her voice was softer, gentler, as though speaking directly to Rex alone. "Good boy." Her mother clutched her tighter, whispering desperately, "Honey, don't. Please. Just sit down." But the child wriggled, stretching her small hand outward, her eyes locked on the German shepherd. She wasn't afraid. If anything, she seemed comforted, as though the dog's presence was the only safe thing in the room. "And Rex," he whined again, pressing his chest low to the ground in a gesture Officer Daniels recognized instantly. Submission. Trust. It wasn't just that the dog recognized the girl. He was acknowledging her. He was responding as though she were part of his world. The prosecutor stood slowly, his eyes darting between the girl, the dog, and the defendant. He didn't speak at first. He couldn't. Like everyone else, he was trying to make sense of the impossible. When he finally did, his voice was cautious. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, this reaction may not be coincidence. Police dogs don't," he gestured helplessly toward Rex. "They don't do this. Not without reason." The defense attorney shot up immediately, his face red. "Objection. This is ridiculous. We are not here to watch theatrics from an animal or a child. This is a court of law, not a—" "Sit down." The judge cut him off sharply. His gavel struck again, the sound ringing out like thunder. "Both of you, sit." The defense attorney reluctantly obeyed, though his glare at the child was unmistakable. The silence that followed was thick. It wasn't the silence of confusion anymore. It was the silence of realization. Something had shifted. The jurors knew it. The spectators knew it. The officers lining the walls knew it. The only person who seemed incapable of acknowledging it was the defendant. He sat rigid in his chair, but his face betrayed him. Sweat dripped down his temple, his lips pressed into a thin line, and his eyes darted once to the girl, once to the dog, and then down to the floor. Refusing to linger anywhere too long, the judge leaned forward, peering over his glasses. "Young lady," he said, his voice gentler now, though the weight of authority still lingered. "Why did you say that? Do you know this dog?" The courtroom collectively held its breath, waiting. The child looked up at the judge, her small face illuminated by the overhead lights. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked back at Rex, who had calmed slightly, but still wagged his tail furiously, panting as though waiting for her response too. Then she nodded, slowly, deliberately. "Yes, she whispered. A ripple of gasps moved through the courtroom again. Louder this time. The judge raised a hand, silencing the room before it could erupt into chaos. His eyes never left the little girl. "You've seen this dog before?" The girl hesitated. She clutched her stuffed rabbit tighter, burying her face against it. For a moment, her mother stroked her hair, whispering something too soft for anyone else to hear. When the child finally spoke again, her voice was barely audible, but every soul in that room strained to hear. He saved me." It was barely more than a whisper, but the impact was explosive. Murmurs surged, rising like a wave crashing against the walls. "Saved her? Did you hear that? The dog saved her?" The judge's gavel came down again and again. "Order! Order!" But the words had already sunk in. The courtroom wasn't just curious anymore, it was electrified. Officer Daniels stared at Rex in shock. He remembered the night in question. Vividly, the call, the deployment, the chase. Rex had returned to him that night agitated, fur bristled, mud streaking his paws. Daniels had assumed the dog had simply encountered resistance. But now he wasn't so sure. The defendant shifted violently in his chair, his composure unraveling. This is absurd," he shouted, his voice cracking. His attorney grabbed his arm, hissing at him to stay quiet, but it was too late. The jury had heard the desperation in his tone. The prosecutor seized the moment, rising again. "Your Honor, I think it's becoming clear that this child's presence is far from irrelevant. If the court permits, I'd like to request further clarification from the witness." He gestured delicately toward the girl. The defense attorney slammed his hand against the table. "She's 3 years old. She's not a witness. She's a distraction. You cannot possibly." The judge silenced him with a glare. "Enough. Sit down." His gaze softened again as he turned back to the child. "Young lady," he said slowly, carefully, "you said this dog saved you. Can you tell us what you mean?" The little girl didn't answer right away. She pressed her face into her mother's shoulder, trembling. The mother looked torn, her arms tightening protectively, but her eyes glistening with something else. Recognition, fear, memory. The moment stretched unbearably long. The courtroom leaned forward, balanced on the edge of revelation. And though the words were still yet to come, one thing was clear. The case had shifted. 2 words from an innocent child had torn open a door everyone thought was sealed. The truth was stepping into the light, and no one, not the defendant, not his attorney, not even the judge, could stop it now. The room remained frozen, locked, in the aftershock of those 2 words, waiting for the storm that was about to break. The courtroom was silent again, but this time it wasn't the silence of routine proceedings. It was the silence of a collective heartbeat held tight in a single chest, the silence of truth waiting to burst through. The little girl's words, "He saved me," still hung in the air like smoke, impossible to clear away. Her mother's arms wrapped around her protectively, but the child wriggled, eyes locked on the German shepherd sitting only a few feet away. Rex's ears were pricked forward, his gaze unflinching, his tail sweeping against the ground with anxious devotion. It was as though the 2 shared a secret. The judge leaned forward, his voice tempered now, softer than before. "Young lady," he said, his words careful, "can you tell us what you mean by that? How did this dog save you?" The mother spoke quickly, cutting in before the child could answer. "Your Honor, she's only 3 years old. She doesn't understand." The judge held up a hand. "Ma'am, I assure you, I will be careful. But if this child has information relevant to the case, the court has a duty to hear it." His eyes, sharp but not unkind, flicked to the girl. "Sweetheart, you can tell us. You're safe here." The child's lower lip trembled. She clutched her stuffed rabbit, so tightly Her knuckles turned white. The room seemed to lean in toward her, hundreds of eyes locked on the smallest person in the chamber. Finally, she lifted her head. Her voice was barely a whisper. I saw him. Every head turned instinctively toward the defendant. The man's face drained of color. His jaw worked soundlessly, his hands gripping the table, so hard the veins bulged along his skin. He shifted in his seat as though trying to melt into it, to disappear under the weight of those words. The defense attorney sprang up, panic flashing in his eyes. Objection! This is outrageous. A toddler's statement is inadmissible. She doesn't know what she's saying. The prosecutor's reply was immediate, sharp as a blade. With respect, Your Honor, the witness just independently identified the defendant without prompting. That cannot be ignored. The judge's gavel cracked against the block. Sit down, both of you. I'll allow this for now. The murmurs in the gallery swelled again, a storm of whispers and speculation. Reporters scribbled furiously, pens scratching across paper like fire. The little girl, seemingly unaware of the chaos she'd ignited, continued speaking, her gaze never leaving Rex. I was outside. It was dark. Mommy was sleeping in the car. I heard noise. Her mother gasped, tears sliding down her cheeks. Sweetheart, no. She tried to hush her, but the girl pressed on. I was scared, she whispered. I saw him. She pointed a tiny finger, unshaking, toward the defendant. He grabbed me. He covered my mouth. I couldn't scream. The room froze solid. The defendant slammed his fists against the table. She's lying. This is insane. He shouted, his voice wild, cracking under the strain. The bailiff moved closer, his hand resting on the holster of his weapon. But the little girl wasn't finished. Her eyes welled with tears, but she spoke with a bravery that belied her years. Then the dog came. He growled, and he pulled me away. She sniffled, hugging her rabbit. He didn't let him take me. A shiver ran through the courtroom. The weight of her words pressed on every person present. Officer Daniel's mouth fell open. He remembered the night with chilling clarity. The way Rex had lunged into the darkness, how he'd returned scratched and panting, with mud caked into his fur. Daniels had thought nothing of it then, chalking it up to the confusion of a chaotic scene. But now, hearing the girl's testimony, it all made sense. Rex hadn't just engaged a suspect. He had rescued a child. The prosecutor's voice cut through the tension. Your Honor, this testimony, supported by the canine's behavior, is crucial. We are hearing, for the first time, the full scope of what occurred that night. The defense attorney looked stricken, sweat pouring down his temples. She's a child, he barked. Children imagine things. She's just parroting what she's heard. This is nothing but fantasy. But the jury wasn't buying it. Their eyes told the story. They weren't seeing fantasy. They were seeing innocence, untainted truth. A 3-year-old couldn't concoct something so precise, so visceral. The judge turned back to the girl. His tone was calm but firm. Sweetheart, when the dog pulled you away, what happened next? The child wiped her nose with her sleeve. He barked loud. The bad man ran. Then the dog stayed with me until the police came. Rex whined softly, as if affirming her memory. It was undeniable now, the dog's recognition of the girl, her words, and the defendant's unraveling composure. The prosecutor stepped forward, seizing the moment. Your Honor, the witness has provided critical first-hand testimony that corroborates the actions of the police canine. The defendant attempted to abduct this child the night of the crime. The dog's intervention saved her. This is not speculation. This is fact. The defense attorney scrambled to respond, but his client betrayed him first. The defendant erupted, his voice breaking, his words spilling uncontrolled. She wasn't supposed to be there. The words rang out like gunfire. Gasp tore through the gallery. The defense attorney spun toward his client in horror, but the damage was done. The confession unguarded, furious, raw hung in the air for all to hear. The girl shrank against her mother, frightened now by the man's outburst. Rex barked, a deep, protective sound, his body lunging forward as if to place himself between her and the danger. The bailiff stepped forward, his voice firm. "Order, Your Honor? Should I remove the defendant?" The judge slammed his gavel. Again, his own hands trembling slightly. "Yes, remove him." Two officers moved quickly, gripping the defendant's arms as he thrashed. "She's lying. You're all fools," he screamed, his voice echoing as he was dragged from the room. But his words had lost their bite. No one believed him anymore. Silence fell again, heavy but different now. It wasn't the silence of uncertainty. It was the silence of revelation, of truth laid bare. The little girl clung to her mother, sobbing quietly. Rex whimpered, straining against his leash, desperate to reach her. Officer Daniels knelt, loosening his hold, allowing the dog to inch closer. The girl reached out a trembling hand, her fingers sinking into the German shepherd's fur. Rex nuzzled her gently, as though reminding her that she was safe, that he was still there to protect her. The judge leaned back in his chair, his face grave but softened by compassion. He addressed the jury, his voice steady. "You have now heard testimony that was not anticipated, but it is testimony that cannot be ignored. The truth has a way of finding light, no matter the circumstance. We will reconvene tomorrow to proceed with this case. For now, the court is adjourned." The gavel struck one final time, but it was almost drowned out by the collective exhale of the room. Reporters scrambled for the exits, eager to break the story. Spectators wiped tears from their eyes. Jurors sat stunned, their minds racing with what they'd just witnessed. And in the center of it all, a child, a dog, and the fragile but unshakable bond that had just shifted the course of justice. For the first time, the town saw the truth not through evidence, not through arguments, but through innocence. And innocence had won. Wake up to barista quality coffee with the Brewmaster coffee maker. With a single touch, brew the perfect cup every morning, customized to your taste. Sleek, easy to use, and designed to make every day a little better. Order now to transform your mornings. The gavel's echo faded, but the weight of what had just happened still hung thick in the air. The image of the little girl pointing at Rex, her voice trembling with the words, "He saved me," lingered in everyone's minds. The defendant's furious outburst had been silenced by handcuffs and locked doors, but his denial could not erase what the room had witnessed. For a long moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, all eyes drifted toward Rex. The German shepherd sat upright beside Officer Daniels, his chest broad, his eyes sharp. But he wasn't just another K9 anymore, not. To the people in that room, to them, he was no longer evidence on four legs. He was a silent witness, carrying inside him the memory of what had happened that night. The prosecutor stood, clearing his throat, his voice carrying the gravity of the moment. "Your Honor, the testimony we've just heard sheds light on why Rex's behavior in the courtroom is so significant. This is not a coincidence. This dog remembers. His reaction to the child proves it." The defense attorney, now pale and shaken from his client's outburst, scrambled to regain footing. "Dogs don't testify," he snapped, his voice sharp, but hollow. "We're not here to play guessing games with animals." But even as he spoke, Rex shifted, his gaze fixed on the door where the defendant had been dragged out. His ears flattened, his hackles rising. A low, guttural growl rumbled in his throat, sending a chill through the courtroom. It was primal, honest, undeniable. The judge leaned forward, tapping his gavel once, not in anger but in thought. Perhaps. Dogs cannot speak, he said, his voice slow and deliberate, but they can tell the truth in their own way. The jurors exchanged glances, their expressions sober. They had seen it themselves, the joy when the girl spoke to him, the recognition, the protective posture when the defendant shouted. This wasn't training. This was memory. Officer Daniels, still kneeling beside Rex, spoke for the first time. Since the chaos began, Your Honor, he said carefully, I've worked with Rex for 3 years. I know his reactions. What we saw today wasn't routine obedience. He recognized her. He recognized him. He nodded toward the door, where the defendant had vanished. That dog remembered. The prosecutor seized on the statement. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Rex may not speak our language, but his actions speak louder than words. On the night of the incident, Rex returned to his handler shaken, muddy, with evidence of struggle. At the time, no one understood what had happened, but now we do. He wasn't confused. He wasn't injured randomly. He was fighting to protect that little girl. The courtroom swelled with murmurs. The story was no longer just about a crime. It was about a dog who had risked himself to shield a child. The defense attorney tried again, his voice cracking under the strain. This is absurd. You cannot convict a man based on the behavior of a dog. The judge cut him off sharply. You may argue your case when the time comes. For now, sit down. The attorney sank into his seat, defeated. A prosecutor stepped closer to the jury, his words calm but resonant. Think about it. The defendant himself revealed knowledge of the child's presence. He slipped because he knew she was there, because he tried to take her. The child recognized Rex instantly, proving she was there. And Rex recognized her, confirming it. Separate pieces of evidence, all pointing to the same truth. One juror, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, wiped at her cheek. She wasn't just hearing a case anymore. She was feeling it. The judge turned his attention back to Rex. The German shepherd, sensing the weight of the room, sat tall and alert. He wasn't wagging his tail anymore. He was watching, waiting, protecting, the little girl still nestled against her mother's chest, peeked out at him. When their eyes met, Rex's posture softened. He whimpered, his head tilting, as if reassuring her again. She whispered something too quiet for the microphones to catch, but Rex's ears twitched, and he responded with a low, happy bark. The entire courtroom witnessed it, the unshakable bond between a child and her protector. Officer Daniels swallowed hard, his voice thick. Your Honor? Rex was trained to serve, but that night he chose to save. He didn't just follow orders, he acted to protect her. That's the truth written in his every move. The prosecutor nodded. And that truth matters. He turned to the jury. When you deliberate, remember that you are not only weighing human testimony. You are weighing the evidence of loyalty, memory, and instinct, the kind that cannot be fabricated. The defense attorney rose one last time, but the fight was gone from his voice. He muttered something about speculation and emotional bias, but no one seemed to be listening anymore, because the truth was already alive in that room, written in the little girl's trembling words and Rex's unwavering presence. The judge exhaled, long and heavy, before addressing the jury directly. This is highly unusual, but justice is not always neat. Sometimes it comes to us in unexpected ways. You have seen the evidence. You have heard the words of a child, and you have witnessed the behavior of a dog who cannot lie. Consider carefully. With that, he struck the gavel. Court is adjourned until tomorrow morning. The sound carried finality, but not closure. Not yet. The jurors filed out quietly, their faces pale, contemplative. Reporters whispered furiously into their recorders. The gallery buzzed with voices, the tension spilling out like steam from a kettle. But in the middle of it all, there was peace. The little girl, her fear finally giving way to relief, slid down from her mother's lap. She waddled toward Rex with tiny, hesitant steps. Officer Daniels loosened the leash, and Rex bounded forward, lowering himself to the ground so she could. Bury her arms around his neck. Gasps and sniffles filled the room, but no one moved to stop it. It was a moment too pure, too raw, to interrupt. The little girl whispered into his fur, her voice muffled but clear enough for those nearest to hear. "Thank you, good boy." Rex closed his eyes, leaning into her touch, his chest rumbling with a deep, contented sigh. And in that instant, everyone understood. The dog had testified, not with words, but with truth written in loyalty, in instinct, in love. A truth no jury could ignore. The courtroom was still trembling from the events of the previous day. The little girl and Rex had already become the center of attention, and the defendant's presence felt increasingly fragile. His usual bravado had been stripped away, replaced by twitching hands and darting eyes. As the trial resumed, the air was thick with anticipation. Every eye in the room seemed drawn to the defendant, who now sat slouched in his chair, hands clasped tightly together. Beads of sweat dotted his forehead, and his lips moved almost imperceptibly as he muttered under his breath. The prosecutor approached the witness stand with renewed determination. He didn't need to prod the girl, she had already spoken, and the dog had confirmed her story. Today was about connecting the dots for the jury. "Can you tell the court exactly what happened the night the child was in danger?" The prosecutor asked gently, turning to the girl. The little girl's eyes brightened, her voice trembling but clear. "He tried to take me. I couldn't scream, but Rex pulled me away. He barked and growled, and I ran to my mommy." The gallery gasped, the sound rippling like thunder through the wooden beams of the courtroom. The jurors scribbled notes furiously, their faces pale with shock. The defense attorney, meanwhile, clenched his jaw, his knuckles white as he leaned toward his client. "Stay calm," he hissed. But calm had long since abandoned the defendant. The man's hands trembled as he reached for his water cup, spilling a few drops onto the defense table. His eyes darted from the girl to Rex, back to the gallery. Each movement betrayed panic, fear, and an unspoken understanding. The truth was now unstoppable. Officer Daniels, kneeling beside Rex, noticed the subtle changes in the dog's posture. Rex's ears twitched at the defendant's every movement, his muscles coiled like springs, ready to protect again. The dog's silent vigilance only amplified the tension in the room. The prosecutor pressed on. "Do you recognize this man?" he asked the girl, pointing toward the defendant. The little girl nodded, her fingers steady despite her trembling. "Body? Yes." Every head in the courtroom turned toward the man. His face contorted, his lips parting slightly, but no words emerged. His lawyer whispered urgently, "Don't react." But the defendant's reaction was already betraying him. His eyes flicked nervously between the girl and Rex, the recognition of guilt washing over his face like a tide. The judge leaned forward, voice calm but piercing. "Sir, would you like to respond?" The defendant shook his head, his voice caught in his throat. His face drained of color as his own denial crumbled under the weight of incontrovertible evidence. The gallery murmured again, the tension palpable. Every movement the defendant made seemed to confirm the child's story, every twitch and glance a testament to his guilt. The prosecutor shifted gears, presenting evidence meticulously. "We have the testimony of a 3-year-old child, corroborated by the K-9 officer's actions, and we have physical evidence from the scene. All of this points to a single conclusion. The defendant attempted to abduct this child that night. Rex intervened to prevent the crime." The defense attorney rose again, but his voice lacked conviction. "Objection. This relies on the behavior of a dog. This is circumstantial at best." The judge's gavel cracked sharply. "Sit down. The objection is noted, but the court finds the totality of evidence compelling." The defendant's composure finally broke completely. His chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly, his face twisted in frustration and fear. "She's lying. This is impossible," he shouted, his voice echoing in the silent courtroom. Rex growled low in response, a warning that caused the room to fall into tense silence. The little girl flinched slightly, but she remained firm, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her gaze never left the dog, and the bond between them reinforced her courage. Officer Daniels tightened his grip on the leash, keeping Rex steady. "Easy, boy," he murmured, though the dog's entire body remained rigid, alert to every movement of the defendant. The judge's voice rose above the tension. "You may remain seated," he commanded. "This outburst is noted. Court will not tolerate threats or intimidation." The defendant sank back into his chair, shaking, muttering incoherently. His lawyer attempted to regain control, whispering insistently, but the defendant was beyond listening. The courtroom had witnessed a collapse that words alone could not conceal. The prosecutor approached the jury again, his tone steady, deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you see here is a man confronted with irrefutable truth. He cannot hide behind words because actions those of a trained canine confirm what has been said." The child spoke, the dog responded, and together they exposed the crime. A juror, an elderly man in the front row, nodded solemnly. "It's clear," he murmured under his breath. "He's guilty." The gallery erupted quietly with murmurs of agreement, the truth sinking in with the weight of inevitability. The little girl remained on her mother's lap, her body trembling from the intensity of the moment. Yet her courage had not faltered. She looked toward Rex and whispered, barely audible, "Good boy. Thank you for saving me." Rex responded with a soft bark, nuzzling her hand gently. The gesture was enough to reassure her, and she finally relaxed, her trust in him absolute. The judge, observing the courtroom, leaned back and sighed. This case has taken an extraordinary turn. What has been revealed here is uncommon, but justice is not measured solely by conventional means. The jury has now witnessed firsthand the connections between human testimony, animal instinct, and the undeniable consequences of criminal behavior. A prosecutor nodded. "Your Honor, may we request that Rex remain present for the remainder of the proceedings? His actions are integral to understanding the sequence of events." The defense attorney groaned, knowing that any attempt to object would be futile. The dog's presence was now irrefutable evidence in the eyes of the jury, and the defendant's inability to control himself had only strengthened the prosecution's case. As the day progressed, more testimony was presented. Witnesses described the scene of the attempted abduction, noting the evidence of struggle and the timing of law enforcement's arrival. But the most compelling evidence was the bond between the child and Rex, a living testament to the events that had unfolded. The courtroom remained on edge, every person acutely aware of the gravity of what had transpired. The little girl, though small and fragile, had changed the trajectory of the trial. Rex, vigilant and steadfast, had confirmed her story without a single word. By the end of the day, the defendant sat slumped in his chair, exhausted, defeated, and visibly broken. His lawyer whispered insistently, trying to salvage what little control remained, but the damage was done. The courtroom had seen the collapse, the unraveling of a man exposed by truth, courage, and the actions of a dog who had risked everything to protect an innocent child. Officer Daniels leaned close to Rex, scratching behind his ears. "You did it, buddy. You kept her safe." The German shepherd whined softly, resting his head on the officer's knee, but his eyes never left the child. He had done his duty, and in doing so, he had testified more clearly than any human witness could. The judge banged his gavel one final time for the day. Court adjourned. We will reconvene tomorrow for closing arguments. As the spectators filed out, the room remained thick with emotion. Many whispered quietly, others teared up. Everyone knew they had witnessed something extraordinary: justice, delivered not only through law, but through courage, instinct, and the unbreakable bond between a child and a protector. And for the first time since the trial began, there was a sense of resolution forming, fragile but undeniable. The little girl rested her head against her mother's shoulder, her eyes bright and wide. Rex stayed close, his presence a living shield. The truth had been spoken, and the defendant's collapse had made one thing clear: the story was no longer in doubt. The courtroom would remember this day forever. The next morning, the courtroom felt different. The air was thick with anticipation, tension replaced with a quiet expectancy. Everyone who had witnessed the trial's turning point, the little girl's 2 words and the dog's unwavering response arrived. Early, hushed, and aware that the day would bring the final act. The jurors filed in first, their expressions solemn. They had spent a night reflecting on the events that had unfolded, the child's testimony, Rex's recognition, and the defendant's unraveling. For the first time, they understood the magnitude of what had happened and what responsibility lay in their hands. The little girl arrived with her mother, clutching her stuffed rabbit. She walked slowly down the aisle, her tiny hand held firmly by her mother. Rex followed, obedient but alert, his presence commanding respect without effort. He had become more than a canine in the eyes of the courtroom. He was a silent witness, a hero, and a protector. The defendant entered, escorted by officers, his face pale and eyes darting nervously around the room. Gone was the smug arrogance of days past. In its place was a man unmoored, haunted by the truth he could no longer deny. The judge took his seat, his expression calm but thoughtful. "Court is now in session for closing arguments," he said. "I remind everyone that while we have witnessed extraordinary events, the jury must deliberate based on all evidence, presented, human and otherwise." The prosecutor stood first. His voice was measured but resonant, carrying a quiet authority that silenced the murmurs in the gallery. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have seen something remarkable. The courage of a child, the instinct of a dog, and the undeniable truth that unfolds when innocence and bravery intersect. The little girl's testimony was clear. The K-9's response confirmed it, and the defendant's own actions revealed the truth of his guilt. We ask you to weigh this evidence carefully, to recognize not only the words spoken, but the lives protected, and to render justice accordingly." He paused, letting the words settle. This is a story of heroism. It is a story of protection. And it is a story that demands accountability. The defense attorney rose slowly, his tone strained. "Ladies and gentlemen, the events of this trial are unusual, yes. But we must remember that fear, confusion, and interpretation can influence perception. My client maintains that he is innocent, and that any interpretations made today are circumstantial. We ask that you consider the law, the procedures, and the standards of proof before reaching any conclusions." The jurors remained silent, listening intently. The tension in the room was almost tangible, as if the very walls were holding their breath. The little girl shifted slightly on her mother's lap. Her eyes found Rex, and he responded with a low whine, his gaze softening. In that moment, the jury could see the bond living, breathing evidence of protection and recognition that words alone could not convey. The judge turned to the jury. "You have heard testimony, seen demonstrations, and observed behavior. That is highly unusual. It is now your duty to deliberate. The jurors filed out to the deliberation room, leaving the courtroom quiet, but still charged with emotion. Inside the deliberation room, they spoke in hushed tones, weighing every detail: the child's bravery, the dog's actions, and the defendant's outbursts formed a mosaic of truth that was difficult to ignore. One by one, they realized that the evidence, both human and animal, pointed to a single conclusion. The defendant had attempted to harm a child and had been stopped by extraordinary intervention. Back in the courtroom, the little girl and her mother waited, Rex sitting loyally at their side. The gallery was nearly silent, filled with people who had come to witness a trial, only to witness something far greater, a story of courage, instinct, and justice. After what felt like hours, the jury returned. Their faces were serious, resolute. A foreperson, a woman in her 40s, stood and addressed the judge. "Your Honor," she said clearly, "we have reached a unanimous verdict." The judge's eyes met hers. "Please proceed." The foreperson took a deep breath. "We find the defendant guilty on all counts." A collective gasp rose from the courtroom, followed by whispers of relief and astonishment. The little girl clutched her rabbit tightly, her mother's hand resting over hers, tears spilling freely. Rex whined softly, tail thumping against the floor in quiet approval. The judge nodded, his expression solemn. "Thank you, members of the jury. Your duty has been performed with care and integrity." The verdict is noted, and the court will now proceed with sentencing. The defendant slumped in his chair, his face pale and defeated. The courtroom had witnessed his collapse, his fear, and now his accountability. There was no escape from the consequences of his actions. The prosecutor approached the bench once more, glancing at Rex and the little girl. "Your Honor," he said softly, "the heroism displayed here today deserves recognition, not just of the law, but of the lives saved. Rex's actions and the courage of this child have assured that justice was possible." The judge inclined his head. "Indeed, this court acknowledges the extraordinary circumstances and the role of those who acted bravely to protect the innocent." The defendant was led away, his protests now hollow, drowned by the weight of undeniable truth. The courtroom exhaled. Collectively, a mixture of relief, awe, and gratitude hanging in the air. The little girl, still seated with her mother, whispered softly, "Good boy, Rex." The dog responded with a gentle nuzzle, his eyes bright, his body relaxed for the first time in days. He had done his duty, and now the child was safe. Reporters scribbled notes furiously, spectators whispered excitedly, and jurors began filing out, still shaken by what they had witnessed. But the story of courage, instinct, and truth would not fade. It would be told and retold, a testament to the bond between a child and a protector who could not speak but had acted when it mattered most. Officer Daniels knelt beside Rex one final time. "You did it, buddy. You kept her safe. You did everything right." Rex leaned into him, panting softly, content in the knowledge that the little girl was protected and justice had been served. The mother embraced her child, tears streaming, and whispered words of gratitude and relief. "You are so brave, sweetheart," and so was he. She nodded toward Rex. The courtroom emptied slowly, leaving behind the echoes of extraordinary events. The two words that changed everything: a dog who had testified without speaking, and a child whose courage had guided the path of justice. As the doors closed, the little girl's voice could be heard one last time, soft and full of wonder. "Good boy." And in that simple phrase lay the truth of the entire story: trust, courage, and the unbreakable bond between a child, her protector. Justice had been served, but more importantly, a life had been saved, and a hero had been recognized. The courtroom would never forget the day a child and a dog proved that truth has many forms and that sometimes the smallest voices and the quietest heroes leave the biggest impact.